his gift. Big Mac blinked, still trying to comprehend just what it was that he was staring at. It looked like Marble, with her grey tail raised high, was presenting herself to him, but he wasn't quite sure that was possible. For a moment, he considered that he may have been beamed by a rock from limestone, and this was all but a dream. A quiet whimper escaped the mare, and Big Mac decided that dream or not, he should see why she made such a noise. He walked forward, coming to her face and seeing a trail of tears coming down her cheeks as she shook. Are you okay? Marble opened only one of her eyes, the other covered by her long mane, as she began to tremble more. She opened her mouth, but then just buried her face into the wooden floorboards, unable to muster the words she so desperately needed. The two of them would have been doomed, if not for a well-timed paper airplane from Pinkie that hit Big Mac on the side of the head. He almost didn't register it due to the pain in his chest. It was so tight with fear, arousal, and something deeper, warning within him that his mind was elsewhere. However, he was still a grounded Apple family member and looked to the sheets of paper as it hit the ground. Picking it up, he saw, "Dear Big Macintosh, stop being a dummy and tell her you love her too. Also, remember to examine her tail just a bit more. Have fun, you two wild childs. Pinkamena, Diane Pie." Big Mac put the note down, his mouth feeling about as dry as the desert. He swallowed hard, trying to get something back, before he pointed to the letter, and more specifically, the words, "Love her too." Yup. Marble opened her eyes again, unable to lower her tail now simply because the humiliation had made her want to only be a statue. She wanted to know why he said something now, though, and felt her heart stop as she saw what he was pointing to. Her cheeks grew a fiery red as her tail swung lightly, and she buried her face in her hooves. She continued to sway her tail, though, as she then looked up, her wide, purple eyes staring at Big Mac, and then flicking back to the last bit of the letter. Big Mac felt his own heart skip at the cute pose before turning to the letter. He soon thanked his red coat as he remembered what he had first walked in on, and slowly, tentatively, walked back, looking at the base of her tail and trying to ignore the tantalizing puckered asshole below it. He saw a small ribbon attached to a card. The card read, "To Big Mac from Marble Pie." Marble barely squeaked for a moment as she felt her nethers to be gently grazed by his hoof. As she glanced back to see Big Mac staring at her, she swallowed hard, sharing Big Mac's current condition in her own mouth, and barely shifted her weight back, pulling more of her private slit against the strong farm colt's hoof. She then barely managed to as she covered her whole face with her hooves now. Big Mac swallowed hard. While he had known the mare for only a day, he himself had known he had some sort of odd feeling towards her. As he lowered his hoof, he bit into his cheek. He didn't want this if he didn't mean it, if he wasn't sure. Glancing back at Marble's face, though, and seeing a tear fall down it out of fear, he knew he never wanted to see her cry again. Every fiber of his being decreed that, and he hoped that was the certainty he wanted. Big Mac next nuzzled against the sweet-smelling folds, his heart racing with his mind as he thought about what he was supposed to do. He knew that a mare needed to be ready before sex, but was this small bit of liquid here enough? He thought for a moment about trying to lick her and help that way, but with how dry his mouth was, he bet it would do the exact opposite. He paused for a moment, petrified with fear. It was then that another airplane hit Big Mac in the head, and he looked at Pinkie's new note. All it said was, "It's her first time too. Do what's natural." And that actually failed to help all that much. as now he was wondering how Pinkie was watching them. The next note to the other side of the head answered his question, yelling at him about how she would stop when he actually grew a pair. He sucked in one more breath and decided that Pinkie was right. Marvel whimpered slightly as she saw one of Big Mac's hooves come down beside her head. It was quickly joined by the other, and she never thought she had ever been this tense before. That was quickly proven wrong as the flared tip of Big Mac's member touched her, and she became the statue she had wanted to be. He did not enter as she had expected, though, but instead lowered his head and nuzzled her ear. "I love you." Marvel's eyes widened and her whole body relaxed as tears sprang to her eyes. They were happy tears this time, and she nodded fervently as she tried to push back against him, her hips wanting him inside her now more than ever. Big Mac soon obliged, nibbling on her ear as he did so, as the large girth of Big Mac's member pushed into the tight, virgin slit. Marvel let out a small squeal. Big Mac froze immediately and breathed heavily into her ear. Her pussy was unbelievably tight, and his cock trembled within. The walls were so smooth and yet gave plenty of feedback, making it harder for Big Mac to speak than normal as he desperately tried to form words. He needed to, though, lest he hurt his beloved. Nope. Marvel tensed, her folds closing at the practical threat to what she desired so badly. She shook her head before putting her hooves back over her mane. Her face was only red now as she realized she had practically pleaded for it. The slightest moan escaped her lips as Big Mac understood the gesture and slowly ground his shaft within her. For a few moments after that, the two knew ecstasy, with Big Mac's gentle thrusts matching Marvel's own tiny sways. Big Mac wondered how stallions normally went all in, but only a few good inches seemed mind-blowing to him. However, he didn't want to end this so early. He wanted to be like this forever, and Marvel shared the exact same feelings. But for two inexperienced ponies like them, 30 seconds would be all they got, and all they needed. Big Mac was smart enough to pull out, no matter how much he wanted to push into those tight, tender folds for his release. Instead, he let his hoof bring him to his peak, gently stroking his member before his body became rigid. Marvel watched him with bewilderment as he did so, knowing how kind he had been to her, though also wondering what he would do if she had gone pregnant. The image of Big Mac massaging her extended stomach caused her hoof to reach down, and one last touch against her clit was all that was needed for her body to become tight. Big Mac watched as the pleasure rolled through his gray mare, and at the ensuing drippage that came from her nethers. She even let out a cute yell with the last act, and it warmed his heart to see he had done a good job. Slowly, he bent his legs and nuzzled against her neck, coming close to her as warmth filled the air. They met each other's eyes for a moment before leaning in and letting their lips lock. It was at this moment that the door to the room was slammed open, with a very angry Limestone on the other side. I heard Marvel scream, "What?" She stopped, her eyes widening further as she saw the two muzzles separate. She next took in the white gel on the floor and quickly fixed the description in her head. One of her eyes turned red, a blood vessel having burst within as both pupils became almost non-existent. She cocked her head to the side. You touched Marvel?" Marvel tried to say something, but only let out a whimper, further implicating Big Mac as Limestone charged to a scream. Pinkie lowered her binoculars, frowning from her perch. I had forgotten to take her into account. She then shrugged and hopped down. Still, mission accomplished, and I know strong old Big Mac will be just fine. In the distance, Big Mac yelling for help could be heard as she glanced over her shoulder before shaking her head, knowing that she would end up much worse if her part, as the mastermind of all this, were to be found out. just fine.